In this video, I'm sharing my behind the scenes process of designing a self-care food forest full of herbs for herbal teas, medicinal plants for natural remedies, and also a space for relaxation, rest, and nature connection. I want to show you the exact process that I use to design a food forest from start to finish so that you can understand the system and apply this to your own design. I'll walk you through every part of it, right from setting goals and themes, choosing layout and materials, and choosing plants to nourish the body and the mind. So whether you're starting a design for your own space or just gathering ideas, this is a design share that's rooted in permaculture and self-healing. And I'll break it down into simple steps so that you can follow along. So let's walk through it together. The design that I'm sharing today is one that I produced for the National Trust for their first ever forest garden, which has been a really exciting project to work on. So even though this design didn't make it into the final plan for the garden, it was one of my favourite designs to create because it felt very personal to me. Shugborough, where this garden was designed for, they have always had a history of sort of doing really interesting, innovative gardening in the past, and the National Trust felt that the most innovative thing that they could do for the garden in our modern time was actually to create a food forest, which I think is a really exciting thing, and it's been brilliant to be part of this. So the design that I'm sharing today is all about self-care. So it's a forest garden, it's got plants using multiple layers and the same kind of techniques that I'd use for just an edible food forest, but the theme is all about self-care and using herbs for healing as well. So you may think, why design a food forest for self-care? But when I was much younger, I used to suffer from depression and panic attacks, and I really found that spending time outdoors really helped with that, and I would take herbal teas and things to really help me to relax and to find peace and calm. And so I think when creating this garden, it was the first time that I'd really done a sort of deep dive into plants that are really great for our mental and physical health. I've done lots of purely edible forest gardens before, but this one was really about the healing properties of plants, not just herbs, but all sorts of different plants, and also about creating spaces where we can sort of rest and pause and rejuvenate ourselves as well. I've certainly found since being a gardener full-time as my job that I have not suffered from depression again, and whether that's just because I've been really lucky to have left that behind, or whether it's because being out in nature all day is such a healing place to be. One of the things that I also wanted to include in this garden was even just plants to use for first aid. So when we're out and about, whether we get cuts and scrapes or bruises, to find some plants that we could grow ourselves as our own first aid kit, really, our own nature's first aid kit. So this is something that I had so much fun researching as well, and including some of these plants in amongst the other plants for herbal teas and healing. So I want to start really with how I start every design process, and that is by sort of creating this vision, putting together a mood board and bringing together lots of different ideas and thoughts that I've had around that theme and bringing them all together in one place. And I know that some people like to use something like Pinterest or some kind of way of gathering thoughts digitally, but for me personally, I find that sort of working with my hands, drawing, sketching, collaging, that really helps me to really gather my thoughts. The act of just sort of flicking through magazines or sketching with a pencil or scribbling down ideas, I feel it helps my creativity to kind of be a bit more free, whereas I find that when I sit down at my computer, it kind of kills my creativity a bit. So I personally tend to use more collage. So I've got a few examples of things that I have done, and these are collages, the collages that I presented to the National Trust as well. So I really feel like if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for our own gardens at home. And so the elements that I wanted to include were very much about herbal teas, because herbal teas are one of the easiest ways that we can use herbs at home. So there's nothing complicated about it. You just pick some flowers or some leaves, you put them in some hot water, you let them steep for about 15 minutes, and then you drink them. And you know, some people might think of herbal teas as being just for flavour, but actually we can really get a lot of healing benefits from herbal teas. And I myself at the moment am taking daily herbal teas as part of treatment for a chronic health issue, and I've been seeing a herbalist, and it's been absolutely amazing for me to see the difference that even just taking a herbal tea a few times a day, when you add it up over several months, it can really make a huge difference. So herbal teas are a large part of this design, because that is just the simplest way that we can use these herbs ourselves at home. Some of the herbs that are included in this design are things like lemon balm. That's really good for stress and anxiety. It's a very calming herb. Things like lavender as well, which mixes really nicely with the lemon balm. And actually one of my favourite teas just for de-stressing at the end of a day is lemon balm, lavender and chamomile, and that's just a really, really calming tea, and it tastes really delicious as well. And they're three herbs which are really quite easy to grow, so long as you have a bit of sunshine. I've also included some plants which are great for skincare, so things that oils and body butters that you can make yourself just by infusing herbs in oil and then adding a bit of beeswax in once you've warmed the oil up. And then it sets hard, and you can create your own body butters and balms to put on your skin. So things like rose, which is a really great nourishing plant for skin, and other things like calendula as well, which are really good for sort of calming skin. One plant I've included is witch hazel. So whilst extracting the part that you need for using for skincare is a bit more complicated, I've included that there just partly for me. I'm growing witch hazel in my own garden at home, and it's just a plant that I want to learn how to extract that. So I've put in some plants that are maybe a bit more tricky to use, but I think it's important to have plants that are used differently within a garden, particularly because in a National Trust property where it's a public space for learning as well, to put different plants in so people can learn different techniques about how to use them as well. So when I'm creating the vision for this garden, it's very much about designing with the intention of the garden. You know, what kind of purpose is this garden going to have? What kind of energy do I want it to have? Do I want it to be a calming space? Do I want it to be a space for activity? All these kind of things I think about within the space. So this garden in particular, it's very much an emphasis on relaxation, on self-care, on meditation, space for yoga, space for a hammock, a fire pit, because I just personally find one thing I found really beneficial for me, particularly during the lockdown months when life was very stressful, was just simply sitting around a fire pit in an evening whittling a stick. I tried to do spoon carving. I only ever got one finished spoon, but just even the act of just sitting there whittling a stick, I just found really, really calming and rejuvenating. So this is very much about creating a space for people to relax and, you know, sip a herbal tea, or even just sitting around plants in a green space surrounded by nature is really healing, even without having to actually ingest any of the plants in any way. So once I've decided on the intention or the goals for a garden, then I can start to think about other elements as well, like what materials I want to use. And because this forest garden, it was designed as part of a series of like small demonstration forest gardens, each one with a different theme. But what really connected all of these demonstration gardens to the wider forest garden that it was also part of, was using really natural materials. So I really wanted to use materials that you would get from a forest, you know, find in woodland in a natural space, and use them in different ways to create structure and to delineate space within the garden. So the bed is simply edged with some logs, and there's a log pile, a curved log pile, to create a kind of barrier between that and the garden next to it, but also obviously to create some really valuable habitat, particularly in smaller urban gardens. You know, habitat is really important because there isn't that much wild space. So lots of log piles, and then surrounding the fire pit area, sort of logs on their edge as well. So they could double up as both seating, but also to separate the socialising area from the flower beds as well. So it's very much thinking about the materials and how those materials are going to make you feel, compared to, you know, edging all of it with brick would make it feel much more kind of stark and urban, whereas by keeping the materials soft and natural, it really helps to kind of keep that feeling of being immersed in nature. The gardens, there's a big walled garden just the other side of the forest garden, so I had this huge brick wall as a backdrop, which also took quite a lot of sun away from the garden, which did make this challenging because a lot of herbs like really sunny positions, so I couldn't quite include as many of the sun-loving herbs as I would have liked, because I had to take that into account. There's no point in me designing a garden full of sun-loving herbs that are actually in reality in shade most of the time. So as with any design, there's always a bit of a compromise. So I put the sun-loving herbs in the sunniest part that I could at the front edge of the garden, and some of the shade-loving stuff like the witch hazel doesn't mind a bit of shade, and the elder and comfrey and things like that, they've gone along the wall, because even though it does get a bit of morning sun, by lunchtime in the afternoon it's lost that sun, so they're on the back wall in the shadier area. So now let's get on to the really fun bit, which is how I chose the plants. Always my favourite part. I have this notebook which I used for all the gardens that I designed at Shugborough, and so I did research both online and from books, and chatting to other people, watching YouTube videos about herb gardens and use of different herbs for relaxation and self-care. And so I took loads and loads of notes, and I made sure that I wrote down each time not just what the herbs are used for, but also the conditions that they like to grow in, so that when I started placing them in the garden, I could really make sure that I'd put them in the right place. And if you want to do this kind of research yourself and make sure you've got all the information you need, I've got a free plant profile template PDF, which I'll put the link in the description below. But I've got all the information that I needed, and yes, some of it is a little bit scribbly, and but you know, just got all the information that I needed down on paper. And then the harder bit really is then deciding from this huge list that you've got what you're going to choose, because I had probably maybe 100 plus herbs that I would have liked to include in the garden, but it's quite a small space. It's particularly because we've left space for enough space for things like yoga and having a fire pit, it means you're sort of limiting a bit more the space that you've got for the plants themselves. So in actual fact, there were maybe 7 or 8 square meters for putting plants in. So I had to really find down the plants that I wanted to put in. So I did this by going back to the goals and the intention that I'd set for the garden at the beginning, which was all about kind of self-care, relaxation, and helping your kind of mental health as well. So I chose calming herbs, things like lavender, things like chamomile, things that, you know, that people would be more likely to use in herbal teas, rather than some of the more obscure herbs that maybe don't taste very nice either, because one of the main things is if something tastes really horrible, you're less likely to keep using it. So these are the kind of thoughts that were going through my head when I was starting to narrow down the plants to include in this design. Because quite often these plants will overlap, so you know, yes, chamomile is great for a relaxing herbal tea. It's also really great to put as a compress on a wound to help to you know, sort of calm it down, and it kind of has an antimicrobial action as well. So rather than having separate defined beds where to say, oh, this is all the first aid garden and this is all the herbal tea garden, I actually mix them together because many of the plants have multiple uses. I mixed in a few things as well that which are just really lovely for their scent as well. So maybe you can't make a herbal tea out of them and you can't put them on your skin, but something like Lily of the Valley just has such a beautiful scent that it kind of can really lift the spirits. So some of the plants in there as well are just in there because they smell absolutely amazing. I've included in the apothecary rose as well. This is a rose that has been used for hundreds of years and was the traditional sort of medieval rose that was used, and so that's why it's called the apothecary rose. So I wanted to include this. So even though there are more modern roses which maybe flower more freely or are more disease resistant, I thought it would be really nice to include this rose because of its history really. And as I say, particularly when you're designing for a public space, you're always thinking about different learning opportunities as well for the public, and plants that they could learn a little bit about the history of self-care and medicinal gardens as well. Marshmallow is another plant which I've included, and I grew this for years as an ornamental before I even realised that this plant was marshmallow. It's the plant that was traditionally used to actually make marshmallows, which were used medicinally. You use the root, but you can also use the flowers and the leaves in a tea. Really help to sort of calm down aggravating conditions. So that's a really fantastic plant, and it's absolutely beautiful. It grows to, you know, sort of 8 foot high. It's absolutely huge. The bees love it, and it's also just got a really lovely sort of tactile leaves that feel a bit like velvet, so whenever I walk past I can't help but sort of give them a little stroke. And all these little elements that come into my head when I'm thinking about something like a self-care garden. So not just what the plant is used for, but all these other properties as well. Is it a tactile plant? Does it smell nice? How does it look? All these things come into play. And just as within any food forest that I create, bringing in other plants for pollinators as well. So bringing in plants that will help us with our natural pest control is really important. But one of the really great things about a lot of the herbs is that they already serve these functions. So things like mint or chamomile or sage or lavender, they already are plants that are really great for pollinating insects. And also a lot of them, because they have quite strong flavours and smells in their leaves, they're actually much less likely to be attacked by pests because they have these really strong flavours. So they're actually some really tough plants that if we plant them in the right place, they should really look after themselves, and mean that we have to intervene very little in the garden in terms of pest and disease control, which is great. So now I've shared a bit about the process of designing this garden. I always like to, when I've finished a design, sort of go back and think, how might I have done this differently? Is there anything else that I could have thought about incorporating? Because maybe next time I'm asked to design a medicinal food forest, I might, you know, want to have thought, what did I learn from this process? And I think it's a really important part of permaculture design. We are always told at the end of a design process to kind of reflect, evaluate how things went and reflect on how we might have done things differently. And I still do this now on every garden design that I do. I look back and I think, how might I have done it differently? And it's a bit tricky because actually this garden isn't ever going to come into being. It was part of a wider design project for the National Trust where lots of different gardens were designed for the same space. So really it's more thinking about what I learnt from the process, and in my own garden where I'm designing some sort of herbs for healing and spaces for relaxation as well. And I think what would have perhaps been nice with hindsight would have been to maybe put something like a willow arbour maybe within the garden as well, because sometimes it's nice to feel a bit more enclosed. So I think that's maybe if this was my garden and I had built it myself and over time I was thinking, what can I add to it? I think that is probably an element that I would add to it now. And it is actually an element that I'm going to be creating in my own food forest, just to give that nice feeling of enclosure and to have, to just bring nature really close up to you, right up to eye level. And I'm still very much learning about herbs and their healing properties. It's been a real passion of mine that has built up over the last few years. More and more people have been actually requesting designs for healing forest gardens for specific issues that they have as well, which has meant me getting the fun job of doing extra bits of research to look up, what are anti-inflammatory herbs, to try and incorporate those into designs, and also having a little play myself with making balms and tinctures and herbal tea blends. And it's something that I have just found so much joy from. It's something I'm really building up and creating my own mini apothecary in a cupboard upstairs. There's literally just in a cardboard box upstairs using old jam jars. So I'd really, I think I'd really like to encourage you to think about your own garden, whether there's a way that you can bring in those kind of healing qualities. Do you find that you don't have anywhere nice to sit and just drink a cup of tea? Is that something that maybe you could incorporate into your garden? Or do you have your own health issues that you might be able to find just a few herbs that you can add into your garden for having daily cups of herbal tea? I'd really be interested to hear what sort of elements or plants that you might put in your own kind of dream self-care garden as well. So please drop a comment below. I always read them and I just love to hear from what you're all up to.